Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing today? I hope you are doing super duper duper doo. We're back to a usual tech setup today, although I still feel like everything's brand new. We'll give it a couple of minutes for people to join us. Does that work now? Apologies for everybody who couldn't hear me. We're just going to turn the music down for a minute. And I'm just going to check that I am now audible. Yeah? Oh, fantastic. I hope you enjoyed that silent meditation there, just looking at the visuals. So no one heard anything that was said at all leading up to that. Darn it, that might have been one of my best introductions yet. Who'd have thought? Well, my name is Daniel Holenko. Welcome to the Conscious Catchup, shepherding your consciousness for greater leadership, for a better world. We always begin how we begin our lives, and that is with a little bit of breath work. So, just to make sure we are all grounded, we're going to take 1 or 2 breaths right now, together this time. Not much. You've already listened to some beautiful music. So just 3 breaths with me. Breathe in. Filling your lungs, and then breathe out. Breathing in. Filling through the lungs, hold. Breathing out through the mouth. In through the nose. And out through the mouth. There we go. We will start again. So I want to say a big thank you to everyone that joined me who did tell me that they couldn't hear me. However, I didn't see, which is a big lesson on my part anyway. And another big lesson as well for anyone who's doing any live streaming, because I know a couple of you who are watching definitely do, always do a tech setup in advance, because then at least people can hear you. Always an important aspect whenever you're doing any form of live streaming. So welcome everybody to the Conscious Catch-Up. Good morning to Joe and good morning to Dominic. We have Christine, we have Charmaine, we've got Stefano with us. Thank you very much for taking some time out of your sunny day. If wherever you are is anything like me, you may have a sun-kissed skin. I've definitely caught too much sun today. I can totally feel it. Too much sun, not enough water, leads to what? Well, not in optimal states, I'll tell you that. Okay, people, so where are we going to go today? Now, normally, I would always just share one of the things that I made, which started this off, which was a database to start to just bring in a little bit of personalness into business, into people's lives. There's so much awesome stuff going on. And I usually kind of run through that, but because I'm doing these weekly now, it's going to be the same sort of days that I'm running through. So I'm always going to leave it in the description above. It's a really simple database to run through. You've always got access to it. And it just steps out some things that we can do for ourselves, whether it's yoga, Pilates, dance, movement, meditation, mindfulness. So much stuff that is on offer. And I really wanted to cancel that. And I really wanted to make sure that people had access to that. But fundamentally, what I always want to get into is this concept of where consciousness and where business meets. And that's why I've started discussing this idea of shepherding consciousness. And it's not that I'm a shepherd, it's that we're all shepherds of our own consciousness. We all have this ability to lead ourselves. And quite often we hand over that ability to other people, to other agents, to other externalities. And we forget that we are our own sovereign being, and we forget that we are our own shepherd of our own consciousness. And right now, as we look around the world and we see all of the changes that we're getting with business, we look at all the changes we're getting around society, there's never been more of a pressing time to start to practice this. So I really want to anchor in with these shows, this idea and this concept that we're standing for something as sovereign human beings that's beyond ourselves. But it begins with us as ourselves becoming part of that, a little bit like greater than the sum of the whole. So on our own, we can look after ourselves, we can represent ourselves, but together, as we come together for something greater, as we start to see a huge shift in business, that's when we're really starting to be able to affect and impact the external world with a greater ability, with more oomph, let's say. And so today, what I wanted to discuss was around one of the 9 aspects of Human 5.0, and it is around this concept of sensible sense making. And I first came into sense making through a gentleman called Daniel Smachtenberger, who was on Rebel Wisdom. If no one's listened to that podcast, they're on YouTube as well. They're phenomenal to listen to, really gets you thinking about things. But it posed this question for me, like, what's the difference between discernment and sense making? And discernment is the ability to judge. So we look at something and I cast a judgment on it, and I think that that's good, or I think that that's bad. I think that's right, wrong, it's left, it's right, it's whatever you want it to be. It's my discernment of that thing, of that object. But sense making is when we start to take all these pieces that we have discerned and put them all together and make sense of it. And usually when we talk about sense making, there's this notion of collective sense making. How do we as a group of beings, first of all, hear all of this noise that's coming into the world, and in the middle of the noise, find the signal? Because the signal is there, but it is so enshrined by noise that we struggle to find it. So as part of the aspects of Human 5.0, which was this idea where we take what are the things that allow this next phase of humanity. Like we've gone through from what I've looked at, 4 different iterations of humanity, and where we are now, as most of us on this planet, we're Human 4.0. We're in this information age. But I shared last week, like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the egg always comes first, and it hatches what will become the chicken. And this next phase that we're moving into, this age of wisdom, will only come about when humanity brings it around. The age doesn't come first that gives birth to the human. The Human 5.0 exists, and then that creates this age of wisdom, this age where we are not at odds with each other. We're not at war with each other. We're not in opposing views that cause conflict with one another, whether that's verbal conflict or physical conflict. This age of wisdom allows us to operate together around the whole planet as a single entity, rather than, as Daniel Smack-Jamaica put, rather than human beings bumping into one another. We're human beings that can elegantly organize ourselves into a complex structure that's able to take Buckminster Fuller's words, to be able to move the resources around the planet with harmony. He said we don't have a resource problem. We have enough resources on the planet to feed and water every single person. What we have is a distribution problem. But he said this in like the 60s and the 70s. So I don't actually think we have a distribution problem. We have a consciousness problem. And the minute we can raise this level of consciousness to a space whereby we can all begin to operate with one another together, then we're starting to be able to really make these shifts. And the 9 aspects of Human 5.0 really starts to come around and talk about that. And that's where sensible sense making comes in. A good afternoon as well to Madiha, who's with us, and Angelita, and Alex Birtwell as well. Hey, everyone, I hope you are good. So let me know what you think sense making is as I go through this, because I am interested. Because when I first heard the term sense making, I mean, it kind of makes sense, but at the same time, it's not something that's talked about. But if we think of it like this, I have the ability to discern. It's my choice. I can judge something as whatever I want it to do. But then I can judge something, but not actually understand how this plays a part in things. And sense making is that next level up. It's, okay, well, I think this is good. Okay, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for you? What does that mean for those people over there? Because when we start to make sense of things, and the sense is a collective sense, when we all agree that this is leaning in that direction and benefits us here and doesn't benefit us there, we're able to start to make better decisions. And very often, we hand over our ability to sense make to somebody else. You read a newspaper, you take its information, you absorb that information, and then you repeat that information. You have in that moment not made sense of the world yourself. You've taken someone else's sense making and you have regurgitated that through. And this is, for the most part of humanity, what's going on, especially right now with all the videos on Facebook and everything being passed around. And so it's about cultivating this ability for us to make sense of the world. So if someone shares some information, it's coming through their bias. It's coming through the way that they see the world, and they're sharing it with you with their ability to articulate what they think. But then where did they get their information from? And their information came from a video that they watched. Okay, cool. So the video will have an agenda, it will have its own bias, it'll have its own way of purveying what information it wants to, based on whatever research it's done. But that research could be summary research. And it's not a never-ending chain, because at some point we get back to source. But it's beginning to understand that every single piece of information that you receive in, unless it is from source, has gone through numerous iterations of sense making. And the minute we start to see that, the minute we start to see that there's these different iterations of sense making, we start to detach a little bit from whatever it is that we're reading. Because you will have a tendency to lean towards things which support what you believe, and you'll have a tendency to lean away from the things that don't support you. So sensible sense making starts this process of seeing information just as that. It's information. It's come from somebody. It's come from another agent outside of my sphere. And I have to understand whether that might have a bias to it, a known or an unknown bias. So that person might not necessarily know what that they're sharing information that they haven't sense checked themselves. They could just be sharing it. And as far as they truly believe it, it's true information, but it's not the truth. And it's starting to go through this process, because for as long as we don't practice sensible sense making, we will hear information from the people around us. And remember that you are the average of the 5 people that you know the most. So if the 5 people you know the most are probably like you and probably get their information from the same places you get your information from, then all of this information that's coming through just keeps supporting whatever you believe. And at the same time, there isn't an agent in that group, a human, an entity, a person, who's pulling themselves out to go, hang on, this doesn't seem right. And I can fully understand why it can be difficult to do that, because we sit in these circles and there's so much peer pressure that goes on, known and unknown. I know we're not 14 years old at school anymore, but we still feel that desire or want to be part of that group. And it can be very difficult to speak out sometimes or challenge things. And the problem sometimes that we can have with sense making is that until we really begin to practice sense making, we can become so attached. And a couple of weeks ago, I shared about this. So attached to whatever we think we've made sense of, that when someone comes along and challenges it's met with defense, or worse, it's met with attack. And it's in those moments when we start to understand how much the world that we're in is not necessarily making sense of things. So the question then becomes, how do we make better sense? And I would love, like, anyone that's out there to just like share, like, how do you go about making sure that what you think about things is right? How do we actually put into practice the art of being able to make better sense of the world? Because if we don't, we're just going to sit around in a bubble. And nobody wants to be in a bubble, not for a long time anyway, because eventually bubbles pop. And when that bubble pops, you might have a mighty fall down to earth. So understanding that you can flick between bubbles doesn't mean that you have to necessarily believe it, but it's just seeing that there are a lot of agendas with the information that we have outside, like the information ecology. If you think of information moving around the world as like an ecosystem, just like we have the rain that falls in the rainforest in South America, and then the winds travel across and take nutrients to other parts of the world, and we have this environmental ecosystem that supports the world. Well, we have an information ecology as well, and there are different factions, there are different views. You have, if you want to take left wing or right wing, right wing. So all of these different things play a part. So the information ecology is everywhere. And you could easily argue right now we are in information warfare with people. There are huge, not so much wars, but there are huge efforts to win your eyeballs, to feed you information, for you to receive that information, and for no sense checking to go about. So one of the simplest ways that you can sense check is to go out there and find people with actual opposing, polarizing views. When we start to expand ourselves to take into account all these different people's views that think very differently to you, And I think I shared this last week when Dominic came on to ask a couple of questions. It's the other person's view where the gold lives. Because assuming you can have a relatively adult conversation with this person and yourself, because you're either going to learn something you didn't know about what you thought, or you're going to learn something about what you didn't know that they thought, their view, perhaps. Either way around, there's going to be growth within that conversation. And it might just be enough for you to go, do you know what? No, I feel I've sense checked this aspect that I'm looking at this thing enough that it seems good, seems true. Or you might suddenly be like, right, actually, I'm not attached to it. That person's made a good point. I'm going to absorb that in and evolve and change it. And some people say, well, isn't that about you changing your mind all the time? Everything's a world of impermanence. How can anyone's view be static when things are evolving and changing and we don't even have access to all the information anyway? So I'm going to bring Dominic on in a moment just to have a bit of an open discussion about this. But I'm interested for people out there, like, have you been caught being attached to whatever you've got and not necessarily making sense of the world? Like, how do you go about doing that? Have you ever done it? Is this the first time you've heard the word? Good morning and good afternoon as well to Sammy and to Kate. So you ladies are watching us as well. So I'm going to bring Dominic on for a bit of a chat to see where we go with this. See if he is in. Let's check I can hear you first. Dominic, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes. Hey, man.
Yeah, you're double checking you can't hear your own voice again.
No, it's all good today.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Dominic Horton. Where are you today?
I'm in my apartment on the balcony in Manchester. Some beautiful hills in the distance. I can see the Etihad Stadium. Yeah, it's really nice. Really nice today.
Nice. You haven't got sunstroke like me then?
A little. I'd like to say sun-kissed.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So what have you heard of sense making before?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I had a lot of questions come up there, actually. I want to just jump on to something that you just said about forming your own views and your beliefs, and how sometimes we're stuck in our own bubble. And sometimes I've been guilty of this before. You jump from bubble to bubble. Different communities will always have different beliefs, and they're solidified in their beliefs and views, and that's the way life is to them. So it's really interesting sometimes to jump from bubble to bubble and to gain different perspectives. But when is it an appropriate time to form your own beliefs after jumping from bubble to bubble and hearing other views and beliefs without agreeing or necessarily disagreeing with them? When is it the time to say, okay, I like what you've said, I don't necessarily agree with that. For now, this is what I believe. Is there a time, is it ever too premature to do that? Or do you need to gain more information? Because there's always going to be ever-going information and views of people. When do you make your own decision, and how do you sit with that and know what is right for yourself?
Good question. Really good question. So I think first of all, there definitely isn't a right or wrong answer with this. I mean, there is no right and wrong anyway, but there are extremes with which you definitely want to be aware of. The first extreme is no opinion, and I have definitely sat in this plenty of times, and I know lots of people who have. They will research whatever they want to research, from government things to policy to politics to conspiracy, whatever it might be. Yeah. And they'll research it, but still don't have an opinion. And it's not because of lack of information. It's because of fear. It's because of fear that it's different to their circle of friends. You know, there's a million different fears that it could be. So the first thing you want to make sure of is that you're not moving into that space where you're just researching almost like it's a soap opera. You're interested in it and you like receiving the information, but you have no real opinion on it. So avoiding that space, but that's at one extreme. At the other extreme is having an opinion before you've even looked at anything. So especially having an opinion, not looking at anything, and then telling people your opinion as though it's fact. That's definitely something you want to try and avoid and not have in your space. So I think where I start to form an opinion is once I have, at the absolute least, looked at whatever I think something is, and then found the opposite of it. Because until you've at least spent some amount of time looking at why you're for something, why you think this is true, and then enough time why you've looked at why it's false, because that's the bare minimum. If you're only going to look at something that supports your, let's say, either gut feeling or what your friends think or what the documentary or newspaper said, if you're only going to look for things that support that, you'll only find those things because your confirmation bias will seek those out. And then if you hold that view, the first person you meet that might have the complete opposing view would completely change that. So I would definitely say, as a bare minimum, if you believe something or you want to make sense of something and have a viewpoint of it, at least look at the opposite, because anyone could come along and go, brilliant. All right, so you think that the sky is blue. Okay, have you looked at why the sky might be a different color? And if someone says, well, no, bad example with the sky, of course, but someone else could say, yeah, I have actually. Sometimes in an evening it's red. Okay, cool. So they've looked at that and you've taken a bit more of a rounded view. So when it comes to bubbles, you could easily have your viewpoint before you even move between bubbles, and you're just moving between them because you're almost like a whirlpool. You're moving around all these different people that have done their opinion of sense checking, and each time you receive their viewpoint, you're layering it on top of yours, looking for the similarities, looking for the contrast, and then each time honing in on that signal, because every conversation you have will either challenge your signal or will strengthen your signal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah. So I guess one follow-on question, which I guess you have answered, but I wanna reword it. So the original question was, is it always necessary to gain an opposing view or to hear an opposing view if it doesn't benefit your path or your work? But I guess what you're saying there is that every conversation will benefit, because it will either strengthen or weaken your signal. But what about, let's say, people in your industry? If you're always gaining information about a particular work or subject that is your dominant aspect of work or field of work, do you really need to gain an opposing thought on what you're doing if it's not gonna add value to you, just for the sake of hearing the opposite? Is that always necessary, or sometimes do you maybe not need to hear that?
It's going to depend what it is you're sense checking. I mean, what came to my mind then was sales. Yeah. So if you are selling a product, or if you have a product or anything like that, and you could argue that beliefs are like products. Money might not exchange hands, but when I'm talking to you about what I believe, I'm selling you my viewpoint, and you will retort back with whatever you think. So seeking out those opposite views will give you the perspectives other people will have. They could be totally wrong. And when I say wrong there, I mean they could be absolutely factually able to just overcome them. But by hearing them, you become more and more accustomed to hearing them and knowing what fits against that. A bit like, I suppose, a little bit like banter. Like in the same way someone might say something and then there's certain retorts back that you would have. They only come because you've practiced enough scenarios where someone said, the sky's green. And you say, well, actually, like all the studies have shown that the sky's blue during the day. Sometimes it's red in an evening. You know, the only time the sky's green will be with the aurora borealis over the northern lights. And so it's the point that you're not hearing the other people's views necessarily to, well, you don't know until you hear the view. But once you've got their viewpoint, even if it's something you've heard before, it's just strengthening that there's nothing new there, because until you have the conversation, you'll never know. And if you're sat in this space that, well, I'm the best in my industry and I'm a master, as soon as you sit in that I know this, you don't know. The first rule of Taoism, like to know is not to know. And as soon as the person says he knows, he doesn't know.
One more question then. What about if there is, like, I know you say there is no right or wrong. What if there is no scientific evidence or facts? There are no facts, because you mentioned earlier about getting the facts of something. So what about if there is no definite answer, and it's just one viewpoint, an opposing viewpoint, and there is no right or wrong, there is no facts? How do you navigate through deciding what's right for yourself? what you believe.
Well, there's a couple of questions in there because it's really interesting, because this whole idea of facts seem to rule the world at the minute, and yet facts are just like the best that we know today, and they're the best that we know through some best practice of collective sense making, which would be like the scientific community with journals. But there's something like 50% of all papers published in journals within 5 years are proven wrong or changed. And so a fact exists today a bit like a car MOT, and it's by collective consciousness that we agree that that's factual. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's given forever, because we're constantly discovering new things. So it's first understanding that just detaching ourselves from this word fact, and just understand that it's collective opinion that right now we think this is the best that it can be. But just reminds me the second part of your question, what you went on to then, because I got lost on the facts bit.
So I guess after you've said that, doesn't really make too much sense. But if there is no facts, or if there is no definite answer, how do you then navigate making your own decisions based on what you believe? Would that be through your own personal experiences or knowledge? How do you navigate that?
It's going to come down to your own values of the world, the value set, the lens within which you choose to see the world, because it is a complete choice. One person's rock is another person's jewel. So you're going to have your own value set, and you're going to see the world through that value set. So when it comes to sense making, whether you have facts or don't have facts, there will come a point where I invite everybody to have a decision, to make a decision. For me, my decisions have to be based on some logic. I don't necessarily need to see empirical scientific evidence to support something, but I need to see, it needs something for me. And I couldn't even quantify what that something is, but it has to make some sort of logical sense, and at the same time make sense in my gut. Something in my body has to say, that feels right. And it's a mixture of those two things. I suppose it's a mixture of an emotional and a logical decision. And that's what I need for me to be okay with something. Someone else might never listen to their gut, and they're only going to look at something that is absolute, which means if there's a little bit of an error, they might not believe that. So everyone has their own value set with how they're going to judge the world. And from that, at some point, we'll make decisions and make their own sense making through that lens.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Is that cool?
Yeah, really well. Hope that added value to anyone watching.
Super duper. Same here as well. I want to say good morning as well to Freddie. Good afternoon, sorry. I hope you are good, Freddie. I've not seen you on here in a while. And at some point, Madiha definitely agreed that, well, I'm assuming, judging by the time of that how she's making sense of the world is with the people around her. But we'll see. Madiha, if you want to clarify what your that would be me would be, that would be good. All right, Dominic, look, man, enjoy yourself on wherever you are in Manchester, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Madiha says, yeah, true. Let's have a look. I was thinking about this today. The only difference is I don't have fear of voicing my opinion, but I choose not to get involved, but just to observe. A bit like my dad, he knew so much and had wisdom, but because he didn't voice it, the world or people around him didn't value him enough. Interesting. Well, just remember that you don't have to voice your opinions to be valued. And if people don't value you, that's partly down to them as well. It's not just about yourself. So there's some people that I really, really love, but it doesn't mean they necessarily voice their opinions all the time. So just understand, just detaching those two a little bit. But it can be very difficult in today's time to voice your opinions. It really can. There's a lot of polarization that's going on right now, and that's why practicing sense making is really, really, really important, especially if we want to become better leaders, especially if we want to have businesses that attract the right people, if we want to have businesses that thrive in different economic circumstances. It's all going to come from a leadership viewpoint that is looking around at all the houses, that is seeking the counsel and advice of other people. So wherever you're at, Mads, like at some point you will find that strength to voice, but do so in the right spaces, do so in the right places, because sharing what you think everywhere isn't necessarily the best way to voice your opinions. But I'm sure you know that anyway. Oh, okay, everybody. So it'd be good if I turned those banners off sometimes, wouldn't it? So that was one of the 9 aspects of Human 5.0. Today was all around sensible sense making. We're going to be wrapping it up in a moment. Before we do that, I'm going to sing you a song. And this was one that was sent over from my father, who is in Thailand. I don't know if he's on at the minute. Can I see? No, I can't see. I don't know if he's off, but he sent it to me. And I don't know if he wrote it. And I've only been practicing it a little bit, but I'm going to give it a go. And it's called Be My Friend. This world's a lonely place to walk around in. This world's a place where life's hard to spend, but we can help each other live. Everyone can give the single gift, the words that live. Be my friend. Some days you wake up feeling nothing but fear. Some days you wonder why God put you here. But then at once comes a word. What was that word you heard when someone said, call your heart, be my friend? It would help if I could see these words really clearly. This may not bring you much conflict to you. It's like this life may lose its touch and kindness too. But we can't blame, but who can blame you? Why you can't see my word? It's only you and me. So if I may, I'd like to say, be my friend. This world's a lonely place to walk around in. This world's a place where life's hard to spend, but we can help each other live. Everyone can give the simple gift, the words that live. Be my friend. Be my friend. Be my friend. So if anyone knows who sang that, I would love to know who wrote it. Okay, people. So we are at the end of today's Conscious Catch-Up Show. I hope that has been a useful insight for you around sensible sense making today. And we are going to finish as we always finish, the same way you began, which is with a breath. So if you haven't had any time to just breathe today, then just find yourself somewhere comfortable. Sit down, stand up, whatever works for you. And let hello to Lewis and to Alex as well. I hope you gentlemen are well. Remember, you can't breathe in the future. You can't breathe in the past. You only only breath you can take is right now. And that's why breath work brings you into the present. So just take a gentle breath in. And breathe out. And breathe into the count of 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4, 5. Just continue at your own pace. Regular, square breathing. Right now, your central nervous system is calming down. Cortisol levels will begin to reduce as you become more in tune and in touch with your body in this present moment, right here. The only time that truly exists is now. As leaders of ourselves, of our businesses, the more centered and grounded we can be, the better decisions we can make. And the better decisions we make, the greater benefit we help all those around us. You are not what you did in the past. You're not what you're going to do in the future. You're who you are right now, in this moment, right here. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Conscious Catchup. My name's Daniel Lincoln, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.